So this is going to be a bit of a weird week.
I understand we're doing Alien Week. Woohoo!
Yeah, well, this is going to be strange because we usually either we watch a show that we have heard of or remember, or just something we don't know anything about to just go in blind and learn some stuff about TV. But I don't know what made you think of My Favorite Martian, but I just remember last week you were like, oh yeah, I remember this show, My Favorite Martian. It was terrible. Do you remember what you were thinking last week that made you think of it?
I don't even know what made me think of My Favorite Martian after all these years.
Yeah, because I guess we were talking about other things, you know, The Rebel and, just stuff you hadn't thought of in a while because it doesn't come up regularly. But in the case of The Rebel of Johnny Yuma, it's like, oh yeah, I liked that show. Where this one, yeah, we're kind of going in expecting to have a bit of a bad time. So I just want to say up front, I guess, because when you mentioned My Favorite Martian, that was from your era, where from my era, there's a show called Out of This World that is a bad, corny alien sitcom. And this is an unusual week because we're kind of going in intending to criticize. I guess that's what I want to just say up front.
I think what maybe made me think of it is I had watched the original movie of The Day the World Stood Still from the 1950s. Black and white, well done, really well done for its time. And I remember thinking, isn't it odd that we've seen, like, once Westerns hit television, there were so many Westerns. Doctor shows, once one started, there were so many of them. But there didn't seem to be a whole lot of alien shows, and yet in the 1950s in particular, well, in the 1960s too, the space race was on, the Americans and the Russians competing against one another, starting in the late 50s with Sputnik, and then ending with the moon landing in 1969. But there weren't a whole lot of television shows that were alien shows, and I think that's when My Favorite Martian came to my thoughts. And
I got some details about My Favorite Martian, but what do you remember about this show before I spit out the facts?
Bill Bixby is he a parent of some kids maybe? And this alien comes to visit and they pass him off as their uncle. And he's an older gentleman, and he has these little antennae that can come up and down. And I don't really remember much beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much nailed it, though. That's I didn't know. Bill Bixby, I know him from The Incredible Hulk. You know, he was Bruce Banner.
Yeah.
So yeah, here was what I got. My Favorite Martian is an American sitcom that aired on CBS from 1963 to 1966 for 3 seasons, 107 episodes. The show stars Ray Walston as Uncle Martin, the Martian, and Bill Bixby as Tim O'Hara. The first 2 seasons were in black and white. The 3rd season was filmed in color. All right, here we go. Here's the top line pitch. A human-appearing extraterrestrial crash lands on Earth. The spaceship's pilot is a 450-year-old anthropologist from Mars. Tim O'Hara, a young newspaper reporter for the Los Angeles Sun, spots the crash and takes in the Martian, saying to other people that he is Tim's Uncle Martin. And that's it. I don't know. So I just got the first episode, so we're just going to see that same plot play out longer. And then, like I said, I found as I was researching, there's as I said to you, I didn't say on the podcast, there's an animated series that came out in the 70s called My Favorite Martians that was broadcast as part of the Saturday morning programming on CBS in 1973 for only 16 episodes. So I assume, too, by 1973 you had better things to do than watch Saturday morning cartoons about...
Yeah, I had a life.
In the cartoon, Uncle Martin is joined by his Martian nephew named Andromeda, nicknamed Andy, who has only one antenna and thus lesser powers than Uncle Martin. And he did appear in one episode of the live-action series. They didn't just make it up. But apparently the cartoon utilized a number of scripts that would have been season 4 of the live-action show. So they just had these scripts laying around for half a decade, and they're like, yeah, just make a dumb cartoon out of it. So that's, I figure we'll watch My Favorite Martian, and then we're going to watch the show from my era, Out of This World. At the end, I've got an episode of the cartoon if we're for some reason in the mood. But I don't know. We'll see how we feel. Because, like, it's kind of fun to watch old sitcoms, whether they're good or bad. But old cartoons are just, they're real bad. You know, because, again, we're not talking, like, Looney Tunes. We're talking, this is, like, really badly animated, corny nonsense. So we might not watch it, but I just thought it was interesting to point out that it exists. That is a thing. That, again, only 16 episodes, too. I was amazed. Like, that's the kind of thing that it was like flipping a coin. Like, is this even going to be on YouTube or whatever? And not all of them are, but some of them, more than none. But yeah, I'll get into the other show after, Out of This World. For now, we'll just watch My Favorite Martian, episode 1. And I guess cross our fingers that it's not the worst thing in the world.
It's the same when with Third Rock from the Sun. They come across as unknowing and naive about some things on Earth, but they're smart. All of them, trying to fit into they're all smart, and I think that makes a difference when they're not dumbing down for the audience.
Yeah, this guy, he almost felt like a proto Spock in a way, right? You
Yeah.
things are so illogical. Yeah, so again, maybe part of it is just when you go into things with a certain expectation. Maybe if we had watched that show at random, we would think different. But I guess going into it kind of with the expectation that it was just going to be kind of cheesy and corny is actually not that bad. So it wasn't bad. Wasn't really bad at all.
No, we liked it. The only thing that I felt, and I said, like The Martian didn't dumb down to us, but the laugh track did.
Yeah, well, and it's that combination of the laugh track and the score of like wacky, zany things happening. It's rare to have both, where it's the zany score and the laugh track. But it's one of those things you can't fault a show for that, because they didn't start getting rid of laugh tracks till like the mid '90s at the earliest.
And that was a big thing at that time that they did those things. But looking at it through 50 years of eyes or whatever, they didn't need it. That show could carry itself without all that stuff.
Yeah, I got to assume, because we've talked about laugh tracks a lot, but I've never looked into the actual, like the full history of them. I got to assume it's because all of these early TV shows, like the ones before this, since they all started in like more vaudeville type roots, like beginnings, right, of like a live audience laughing. So then that must have carried over to TV, and then it just became the de facto thing, and just nobody thought about it for a long time. Yeah, I was saying as we were watching that it's unusual that the Martian, seems weird to me that he's this older guy, because it just seems like the standard thing you would do in a show is just hunk everybody up, especially nowadays. But I like that they clearly picked the male actors really deliberately, because they're good actors. Whereas the one thing that does really stand out to me is all of the women. It's such a stereotypical thing of the time. It made me think of even like slightly later shows, but like, was it called Three's Company? Is that the one with...
Three's Company, Petticoat Junction, any of those where people ran around in peignoir sets.
Right.
Very sexy night gear.
And Three's Company is the one where like Don Knotts was the
landlord
right?
downstairs,
Yeah.
yes.
Because that's the feeling I got from this a lot, is just these kind of ditzy ladies who were just always just there to sort of be pretty. Like you can tell they hired the women to be pretty, and they hired the guys because they were
and to be the love interest. They're just not like just smart women who are just
like in this
doing
show.
Their thing.
This guy is getting the military is giving him the 3rd degree because he seems to have awareness that there was a crash-landed alien ship. Like it's a very serious situation. And meanwhile, the chick is just hanging off him, not even, like, completely oblivious to the situation he's in.
And sitting on the hood of his car and then pulling her skirt down to her knees.
Yeah.
And originally, when they first introduced those 3 women, they come flitting into the room, one of them wearing this little shorty, I think
Well, like this nightgown. It's like something that a Victorian baby would wear.
And the older lady is like the peignoir set with the flowing cape behind her. And that's how they were introduced. And they're all made up, and their hair is beautifully coiffed. They certainly didn't just get out of bed.
It's funny, too, because they have all those clothes like that, I mean, it looks like a baby's nightie, but it's on a grown woman. Like, I don't even think clothes like that exist anymore.
But they did exist in those days. Those were called baby doll pajamas. And they were like a little flouncy top, and they had little matching panties.
Right. So, I mean, again, it's just such a way to infantilize the women. Where the dudes all get to wear suits and be whatever. So, I mean, that's just a sign of the times or whatever. But yeah, just interesting to see that stuff.
It's very reminiscent of other shows of the time, though, like with the laugh track, and that My Three Sons comes to mind.
Well, the other thing that I sort of keyed into my brain halfway through is one reason why I think we're having a hard time connecting it to other alien sitcoms is because I don't feel like that's really where this thing's place in history was, My Favorite Martian. It's more the idea of this, he's got this guy in his life all of a sudden who basically, for all intents and purposes, is magic. You know, can turn invisible, can make things levitate, can do whatever, can mind control the dog and make the dog salute and walk away on its hind legs. Like, he can just do whatever. And I was like, oh, I think what really the vein, if we were to follow this down TV history, is they took this Martian, this older Spock type character, they turned him into a hot broad, and it became Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie.
Oh, yes.
Like that, those I feel like are the shows that this show is like. It's just, they were like, hey, what do we need this very proper actor for when we can put a hot lady in there instead?
But I thought it was I enjoyed it. I would have taken the laugh track out, though.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it was necessary. I think it is the thing that dumbs down the audience. It certainly isn't the acting. It isn't the show. It isn't the premise.
But that's such an impossible request,
I
right?
know.
Like, even if you ask somebody to do that in the mid-90s, they'd probably say no. So in the late 60s, they would say, are you insane?
Yeah.
Like, if we can't make a show
Right,
with no
because
laugh
that's
track.
just, unless it was a drama, anything that was of a comedic bent had to have those two elements in them. And at the time, I probably wouldn't have thought that. But looking back all these years later, I'm thinking, it didn't need it.
Did you ever, I'm sure maybe I've brought this up before when we did this show, but one of the weirder examples of that is MASH, because MASH was a comedy, but weirdly serious at the same time
black
because of all the war stuff.
Really
right?
black humor in MASH.
So when MASH came out on DVD, you could choose an audio option to not have the laugh track and watch it more like it's a normal drama. But because it wasn't designed to be that way, the video parts aren't edited down. So Hawkeye will say something off the cuff, and then they all just stand there for a moment because they're waiting for the laugh track, and it throws off the whole rhythm of the show. You would have had to re-edit the whole thing because you can't just take out the laughs because it just makes everybody look weird. Like, no one can speak without just stopping for 10 seconds before they say the next thing.
That's something I hadn't thought of.
Yeah, it's really in the DNA of a show. Like, you got to start with no laugh track, because if you just take it out, or people do that as a mockery thing now too. With actually, I'll dig one up for you after because it's pretty funny. Big Bang Theory is like our modern equivalent of a bad sitcom. Like, it's the most throwback of all the shows we've had in the last decade. Like, it's just traditional dumb jokes, laugh track, the whole 9 yards. So people have edited the laughs out of Big Bang Theory, and it's like, wow, without the laugh track telling you this is funny, it is so not funny. It's crazy. Like, that show is the least funny show. So when there's no laugh track, it's just awkward, and it's like, oh, this sucks so bad. But anyway, yeah, My Favorite Martian, not bad. And now I'm actually interested enough just in this, now that I'm like, oh, I've never even heard of this franchise before, and it's not as bad as I had feared it might be. So I think we should watch the cartoon, but we'll put it at the end,
Sure,
let's just, because I'm curious now, like, what was the cartoon like? However, now I think we really are going into the crap. So we got lucky with My Favorite Martian, where it actually turned out to be an okay show, where as soon as you said, like, oh, I remember this show vaguely that maybe wasn't that good, and I was like, oh, I've got a show like that too. The show from my youth is called Out of This World, but it could be worse. I just want to really quickly bring up, there's an even worse sitcom from the 80s called Small Wonder that was about a family that had a little robot child, so not quite an alien, but it was so shitty that even in the 80s when I was a dumb kid, I hated it. So I would double hate it now. So like, that wouldn't even be fun. Where I thought what might be fun about Out of This World is I liked this show when I was a dumb kid. So it'll be interesting to see how I feel about it now, because I'm quite sure it's awful, but I really remember liking this when I was young. So, Out of This World was an American fantasy sitcom about a teenage girl who is half alien, which gives her unique superhuman powers. It aired from 1987 to 1991, 4 seasons with 96 episodes, despite receiving mostly negative reviews from critics. Discussing Out of This World, critic Roger Fulton stated, like many juvenile U.S. sitcoms, the series was short on laughs and long on moralizing. The book Television Without Pity contained a review of Out of This World that described the show as quite possibly the worst sitcom ever made. It's a complete failure on every level. The review went on to criticize the show's scripts, acting, and production. so, ouch, right? Yikes. And the only other little note that I found that I thought was funny is in Germany, Out of This World was aired under the name Mein Vater ist ein Überirdischer, which translates to My Father is an Alien. So they went a little more direct in Germany. But yeah, all I remember about this show, it was this girl who is half alien because her dad's an alien. And I think later in the show she developed other powers, but the main one is that she could touch her fingertips together and freeze time. So it's kind of like Saved by the Bell, where Zach would freeze time to talk to the camera and just talk about the show. But that was just a joke. That wasn't really happening. It was just a conceit. In this show, it really was happening. She was literally freezing time, and it would help her get into or out of various jams. I don't really remember that much, though. The only other thing I thought I'd bring up that is kind of weird in hindsight is I was born in 79. The girl in this show, I think, is 73. So when I was watching this show, she was the older girl, like, ooh, intriguing. Alien girl on TV. She seems cool, and I'm like, whatever, 10 years old. Where now, obviously, I'm an old-ass man. So now it's just like, oh, she's just some kid, It's just funny to look at it from the two sides. And what that made me think of, this is like kind of a side topic, but like just high school seems like so all-encompassing when you're in it, right? Like, okay, me and my friends, we're the nerds, and over here, here's the jock guys, and over here, here's the cool, hip people that drive around and have licenses and are just whatever. But I remember after I'd been out of school for like 8 or 10 years, I was up by my old high school. I just happened to be walking by during like a lunch break, and all the kids fled out. And I was shocked to see, like when you actually see a high school kid, how young they are and little they are. They're just all these little pimple-faced, rat-faced little wieners.
That's right. They're just kids, but they feel they are.
Yeah, because I think
practically adults.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of I just felt differently when I was there because I'm right in the scrum of it, but also that on TV, teenagers are never teenagers. Like that's one of the things that was weird about that show Freaks and Geeks is they actually hired teenagers because just for as a business, it's just way easier to hire an adult and make them pretend to be a teenager. So all the teenagers on TV are like 20 years old, So you get that in your head too when you think back to high school. I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, these are tiny little babies. Look at these these are the high school kids? Like they just were like little rats, man. I don't know. I just thought that was funny. Anyway, so yeah, that's one thing that'll be funny for me to watch this show again is because, in my memory, again, it's just so funny to think of this kid who was probably 17 or 16 in this show. She was the older girl when I was watching this show, and now she's the opposite. Well, I mean, not in real life. In real life, she's still older than me, but I haven't kept up with her career. So, okay, we got episode 1 of Out of This World, Evie's 13th birthday. It is called...
I don't know this show at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was definitely not aimed at you. It was aimed at me.
No, but I watch some shows that you kids watch.
Right. So that's pretty bad. So yeah, that definitely falls more into, I mean, again, what I thought we were lining up for this week of just bad sitcoms. So it's nice that My Favorite Martian turned out to be okay because, that show, yikes. Like, I kind of thought right from the start, the very first scene, just that they were making weird boob jokes about, like, the mom's, like, have you noticed anything change about you? Because she's obviously concerned that her daughter's going to be an alien or whatever. And just some joke about like, oh, no, these still haven't grown. And the mom makes some joke about watering them. And I was like, oh, maybe this show will be like slightly edgier than I remember. But it wasn't, because that was it. After that, it was just like so boring that, like I was saying when we were watching it, that even the laugh track was not a big uproarious laugh track. The laugh track was like, It's just like, wow.
Yeah, if it had a faster pace to it, like when the mother was trying to explain to her about her father and her being half alien, it took so long. And they do that a lot on TV where you just say, look, why don't you just come out and say it?
Yeah.
Why do you have to hedge around and hoe and hum and Just say it.
In a weird way, it reminded me a bit from 80s shows of there was a show called Street Hawk that was about a guy who had a super duper motorcycle.
Yes.
So the
Yes.
whole episode you're waiting for him to ride the super motorcycle fast, and Airwolf, the whole episode you're waiting for them to just get in the helicopter and fly. This was like the sitcom version. The only parts I liked as a kid were that she would freeze time, when the bucket of paint was about to fall down or whatever. So the whole time you're just waiting for her to freeze time. And the rest of the episode, you're just like, oh. And yeah, it's like, yeah, that's it. That's what it was. The only joke I thought was kind of funny is that they've got the brother character who is such an 80s stereotype of he's just a big fat guy. And every joke is about how he can't stop eating. Just one of those things that it's just not okay to do that anymore. They just wouldn't have that character anymore. But in this one, he already knows that there's an alien in the family. So when time freezes, they unfreeze him. So everyone's frozen except the immediate family. And this big fat fucking steals an ice cream bar from a kid while time is frozen because he's so fat, he can't stop eating shit for like 5 minutes. So I thought that was funny, not because it was a good joke, just because it's like, man, in the 80s, a fat joke was 100% okay.
Yeah, and they played right into it. There was no anybody saying, "Oh, that's not politically correct."
Right.
No, there was none of that. It was just right out there.
And the other thing that was weird, I guess by the end, I think I started to key in for a bit, is it's her 13th birthday, and this was the year that she's going to exhibit alien stuff. But the mayor shows up. And it's like, why is the mayor at this kid's birthday party?
Because I suspect that the mayor was introduced here because later he's going to be a love interest with the mother.
Yeah, and he mentioned right at the end that he wanted to talk to the mom about his re-election campaign. So it's like, oh, okay, the mom must work for the mayor. That must be why the mayor's
that,
here.
or she is some citizen who is just so involved in her community that she works fundraisers and all that kind of stuff. But I suspect that he's set up as a future love interest. Now, she may not love him because she's obviously in love with this alien, but we're going to see him putting the moves on her, and she's going to put him off because she's got this other man in her life in some other planet. But that's what that was all about.
But yeah, it's also very obviously a sitcom intended for young kids. Like how I said, when I watched this, I was like 10 or whatever, because maybe I was younger, 87. So I was 8 years old when this show came on. Because even just stuff for like, your dad's not around. So you just like, oh yeah, we got divorced or whatever. You moved to Paraguay. But no, they tell this kid, your dad's a spy. And she believes that. Not only that, that's what she's told everyone in the neighborhood, and every kid believes it. Oh, your dad's a spy. It's like only in the dumbest sitcom for the stupidest little kid would that ever fly as a plot point or whatever. So anyway, yeah, that show.
But for a kid show, it wasn't bad. Those kids were real kids. They only looked like they were about 11, 12, 13 years old, except for there was a tall fella with a yellow shirt on, very tall. Boy, if he was only 13.
Right.
He looked like he was about 16, but whatever. But most of the kids were very kiddish looking, so you could see that being I can see that being a hit for kids.
Yeah, and I think I read somewhere, since that was her 13th birthday, like the show ends on her 18th birthday, I guess is the finale or whatever. But I'm sure I would have never thought about that show again ever. But again, like you were saying, how My Favorite Martian just popped into your mind. As soon as you said that, this show popped into my mind of like, oh yeah, what was that show when I was a kid with the pressing the fingers? Boop. So now I know. Now I remember. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess let's throw on My Favorite Martians, the cartoon. And we'll finish off with that. So it's like I was saying, I got the first episode of these other things. But the first episode of the Favorite Martians cartoon was not on YouTube. So I got episode 4 from 1973, Wall to Wallflower. So let's see how this turned out. The My Favorite Martian season 4 scripts turned into a cheap-ass 70s cartoon. Because I always think of from this era, it was a bit before this, but like the Merry Marvel Marching Society, like really bad cartoons. Like basically Disney and Warner Brothers were good cartoons, and every other cartoon was terrible in this era. So Here we go. Yeah, there was a guy, Dan DeCarlo. He was a really famous Archie artist. So specifically, I feel like that's who they're ripping off. Because it looks exactly like that, right?
Yeah. But it also is very reminiscent of the Scooby-Doo cartoons, too.
Yeah. Scooby-Doo and, Josie and the Pussycats and all the Hanna-Barbera cartoons. It's just kind of a melange, right? It's just everything mixed together. So yeah, we flew too close to the sun because My Favorite Martian turned out to be kind of all right. I was like, all right, let's check this out. But yeah, there's nothing at all to recommend that. That just sucks. It's, again, all this stuff we were saying is kind of like Archie. It's kind of like Wacky Races. It's kind of like Josie and the Pussycats. It's kind of like all these things, but it's worse than all of them.
And I'm telling you, we're saying the one with the little girl who could half Martian, could put her fingers together. How was just kind of you know what? It was damn good compared to that.
Yeah, like with this My Favorite Martian's cartoon version. It's just one of those things that, like, as soon as it got rolling, it had only been on like 2 minutes, and you can just feel that we're not paying attention. Like, you can't pay attention. You're trying. You're like, even if you attempt to focus on this, because it's just got that ramshackle, cheap 70s cartoon feeling where everything sucks. They're trying not to make anyone move too much. Even like the sound is indistinct and everything mashes together. And the plot is just nonsensical and pointless, and
That was just awful.
yeah. So I mean, not much to say about that. Just it's of the time. That's just yeah. Because I always think of, like I was saying, how when we watched Transformers and the Smurfs, like I always think of my era of the '80s being a low point for cartoons because it was all toy commercials. It was just He-Man and Transformers and G.I. Joe. But I think the '70s was actually worse because it wasn't commercial and it wasn't as blatantly trying to just get kids to buy toys, but the actual shows were worse.
Cheap. They were just like cheap fodder. It was almost like kids of this era will accept anything. So we can just put any old piece of crap out there and they'll watch it.
And just amazing too because, before this, I mean, obviously Disney has been going strong pretty much forever. The low points to Disney are still pretty good and the high points are amazing. And before this, you had all the Looney Tunes, the Merry Melodies, the Warner Brothers stuff. Or even when we went back to, remember we watched the Fleischer Superman show?
Yeah.
That wasn't a great show from a writing standpoint, but really well animated. I don't know what happened in like the 60s and the 70s where they were just like, whatever, fuck it.
Cheap. It was just like any old thing. We'll put any old piece of crap out there.
Yeah.
And people will take it. You can do inexpensive animation and cheap out a little bit if you want to, but have a good storyline then. If you're going to cheap out on one part of it, have a good line, have a good story. Don't make it all bad story, bad animation.
Like cynical too. It's like they don't care and they're just going to try to rip off every other cartoon of the era. They're just, let's just make Archie with an alien in it. Hey, here you go. Yeah. So that just sucked.